The final number, shimmering with the spectral green of a ghost, was $9 billion. Julian Croft watched it solidify on the holographic display, suspended in the air between him and the five faces staring back from their own sanitized boardrooms across the globe. 9 billion. The price of swallowing a rival whole, of digesting its assets, and spitting out the bones of its redundant employees. A smirk, thin and sharp as a scalpel, touched Julian's lips. He was a shark, and the water was red. "So, gentlemen," he said, his voice a low thrum of predatory satisfaction that the acoustic dampeners in his penthouse office did little to soften, "do we have a consensus, or shall I begin the liquidation analysis for you?" He saw the flicker of capitulation in their eyes, the weary slump of their shoulders. He'd won. It was the moment of the kill, the sweet punctuation mark on months of ruthless, systematic pressure. And then the world outside his window shattered. Not the window itself. The triple-paned, bomb-proof glass that separated him from the Manhattan skyline was perfectly intact. No, what shattered was his reflection in it, his legacy. The Croft Innovations logo, a blazing silver C interwoven with a golden I, which adorned the entire 50-story facade of the opposite skyscraper, his other building, his monument, suddenly fractured. It didn't just go dark. It exploded into a million shards of glittering, dying light, a silent digital supernova that painted the twilight sky with its own demise. A collective gasp echoed through his speakers. Kenji Tanaka, the last holdout in Tokyo, pointed a trembling finger not at Julian, but past him. "Croft-san, an omen. This is a very bad sign." The $9 billion figure on the display flickered, then vanished. The deal was dead. Julian didn't turn around. He didn't have to. He watched the digital corpse of his empire reflected in the terrified eyes of the men he was about to ruin, and a cold, unfamiliar venom that tasted sickeningly like fear began to rise in his throat. Rage was a familiar fuel, a clean-burning, high-octane propellant that had launched him from a gutter-level childhood to this sterile throne in the sky. But this was different. This was a cold, heavy rage, thick with the tar of impotence. "What do you mean, you don't know?" he roared into his phone, his knuckles white where he gripped the cool metal frame. He was pacing the length of his office, a caged panther in a bespoke suit. The city lights below were a taunting, indifferent galaxy of normal, functioning electricity. Only his, the brightest star in the firmament, had been extinguished. "I pay a team of 200 so-called geniuses in our cybersecurity division more than the GDP of a small island nation, and you're telling me that a 50-story logo, our most visible asset on planet Earth, can spontaneously combust, and none of you have a single goddamn clue why. Find it. Find who did this, and bring me their professional head on a digital platter. I don't care if you have to trace every electron flowing into that building. I want a name." He disconnected the call with a vicious jab of his thumb, the silence that flooded the room feeling louder than his shouting. He stalked to the window, the scene of the crime. The facade of the Croft Innovations Tower was dark, a hollowed-out socket in the face of the city, a monument to his humiliation. His entire life had been a crusade against helplessness, against the chaotic, unpredictable forces that had governed his early years. He'd built an empire on the bedrock of control. Every variable was calculated, every outcome preordained. His systems were unbreachable, his strategies flawless. This attack wasn't just on his company. It was on the fundamental principle of his existence. It was personal. He stayed there for hours, a sentinel watching over a graveyard, long after the last of his frantic employees had gone home. The city's pulse slowed. The rivers of traffic thinned to a trickle. There was nothing to see but the dark glass, but he couldn't look away. It was as if he could will it back to life through sheer force of will. Just before 3 a.m., it happened again. A single pixel flickered to life in the center of the vast, dark grid. Then another and another. They weren't silver or gold, but a soft, electric blue. They coalesced, spreading like a virus, but a benign one, forming a shape. It was a bird, a crude, childlike drawing of a bird in flight, its wings outstretched, rendered in shimmering blue pixels 50 stories high. It hung there, in the night sky for almost a minute. A beautiful, impossible ghost. Then, just as silently as it appeared, it dissolved into digital dust, and the building was dark once more. Julian stood frozen, his rage momentarily eclipsed by a profound and unsettling sense of wonder. This wasn't a hack. It was a message, and he had no idea what it said. The next week was a masterclass in controlled chaos. The markets reacted as expected. Croft Innovations stock, a titan of stability for over a decade, took a nosedive. Pundits and rivals alike smelled blood in the water, speculating wildly. Was it corporate espionage? A crippling ransomware attack? A sign of deep, systemic rot within the company? The official statement from CI was a masterpiece of corporate non-speak. They were experiencing technical difficulties with an external-facing display and working to resolve the issue. Internally, it was a war zone. Julian had assembled a team of the best minds from his own company, supplemented by outside contractors from Tel Aviv and Silicon Valley, cyber mercenaries who charged by the minute and promised miracles. They set up a command center in a conference room with a direct view of the afflicted tower, their faces illuminated by the glow of 100 monitors, all displaying streams of arcane code and network traffic data. They found nothing, no breach, no malware, no trace of an unauthorized entry point. The building's network was a fortress, sealed and self-contained. The display's hardware was pristine. The power grid was stable. By all metrics, the logo should have been blazing with corporate pride. Instead, it remained dark, a stubborn, sullen void. But it wasn't always dark. The phantom artist returned, always in the dead of night. One night, it was a field of multicolored flowers, their pixelated heads swaying in an imaginary breeze. Another, a school of glowing fish, swam across the glass facade, their movements fluid and impossibly lifelike. On the third night, a single, gigantic eye, rendered in startling green, opened and appeared to stare directly into Julian's office window, before blinking slowly and fading away. Each display was more intricate, more beautiful, and more infuriating than the last. The media caught on. Paparazzi and news vans camped out on the streets below, hoping to catch the next spectral art installation. The ghost of the Croft Tower became a viral sensation. People saw it as a piece of subversive public art, a Banksy for the digital age. A folk hero was being born from the ashes of Julian's authority. He grew haggard, his Savile Row suits hanging loosely on a frame, thinned by sleeplessness and a diet of black coffee and rage. He abandoned his penthouse apartment, sleeping on the leather couch in his office, unwilling to let the tower out of his sight. The mystery was consuming him, burrowing into his psyche like a parasite. He had his team run every conceivable simulation. Could a satellite be beaming a signal? No, the building was shielded. Could a drone be projecting the images? Impossible. The resolution and clarity were too high. Could someone inside the building be doing it? They swept every floor, every office, every maintenance closet. Nothing. It was a ghost in the machine, and it was making him question his own sanity. His obsession alienated his senior staff. They saw a leader unmoved, fixated on a bizarre, non-critical issue, while the company's value evaporated. They urged him to just shut the whole display down permanently, cut their losses, and issue a statement about upgrading their technology. Julian refused. It was a matter of principle. To shut it down would be to admit defeat, to concede that there was a force in the world he could not control. He wouldn't just fix the problem. He had to understand it. He had to conquer it. One evening, staring at the blank facade with bloodshot eyes, a thought occurred to him, an idea born of sheer desperation. The experts were looking for a sophisticated, complex attack. They were searching for a peer, a rival intelligence. But what if they were wrong? What if the answer wasn't complex at all? What if it was simple, so simple they had overlooked it entirely? The images, the bird, the flowers, the fish, they were artistic, yes, but they were also naive, almost childlike in their execution. He grabbed the remote for the massive monitor on his wall and brought up the full architectural schematics of the opposite tower, the one he had built 10 years ago. He spent hours poring over them, cross-referencing them with network diagrams, HVSC layouts, and security protocols. He was looking for a blind spot. Every fortress has one. At 4:17 a.m., he found it. A tiny anomaly in the plans. A small forgotten space on the 48th floor, right below the massive housing for the logo's primary processors. It was marked on the original blueprints as a mechanical access balcony, an external platform for servicing the climate control units. But the HVAC system had been upgraded 5 years ago, moved to the roof. The balcony was now redundant. It didn't appear on any modern security sweeps because, officially, it was inaccessible. The door leading to it from the 48th floor maintenance corridor had been sealed, or it was supposed to have been. He zoomed in, his heart starting to hammer against his ribs. There was a discrepancy. The security schematic showed a sealed wall. The engineering schematic showed a door. And the network schematic showed a single, obsolete, low-priority maintenance Wi-Fi access point, still active in that sector, a forgotten digital ghost left behind by a lazy contractor. A tiny, unsecured crack in his digital fortress. He looked out the window at the dark monolith across the street. He couldn't see the balcony itself. It was tucked under the overhang of the floor above. But he knew it was there. And he knew, with a sudden, chilling certainty, that his ghost was on it. He didn't call security. He didn't call his team of failed experts. This was his to solve. He grabbed a high-powered telescope, a ludicrously expensive affectation he kept for birdwatching but had never once used, and mounted it on its tripod, aiming it at the spot where the balcony should be. The image was grainy in the pre-dawn gloom, but it was there. An outdoor platform, surrounded by a safety railing, empty. He waited. An hour passed. The sky began to soften from black to a deep indigo, and then he saw it, a flicker of movement, a small shadow detaching itself from the deeper shadows of the building. He frantically adjusted the focus, his breath fogging the lens. The image swam into clarity. It was a child, a little girl, no older than 9, with a cascade of dark, messy hair tied back in a ponytail. She was wearing a worn, oversized hoodie and carrying a tablet, its screen glowing in the dim light. She walked to the edge of the balcony, propped the tablet on the railing, and her small fingers began to dance across the screen. Julian swung his gaze from the telescope back to the tower's facade. A single blue pixel lit up, then another. The bird. She was drawing the bird. This tiny, insignificant child, standing on a forgotten piece of concrete 50 stories in the air, was the ghost. She was the architect of his ruin and the artist of his humiliation, and she was using a beat-up, second-hand tablet to dismantle his $9 billion empire, 1 pixel at a time. The absurdity of it was so profound, so complete, that for a single, unhinged moment, Julian Croft threw back his head and laughed. The laughter died in his throat, replaced by the familiar cold burn of fury. He had the culprit. The relief of that knowledge was immediately consumed by the sheer, insulting simplicity of the method. A child, a forgotten balcony, an unsecured Wi-Fi node. It was an insult to his intelligence, an affront to the very concept of his meticulously constructed world. He strode out of his office, his movements stiff with purpose. He didn't take his own private elevator. Instead, he took the executive lift down to the lobby, crossed the street with the purposeful stride of a general marching on an enemy city, and entered the silent, cavernous lobby of the Croft Innovations Tower. The night security guard, a beefy man named Frank, whose primary job was to watch movies on his phone, jolted upright, his eyes wide with surprise. "Mr. Croft, sir, I wasn't expecting you." Julian didn't break stride. "Override code for service elevator shaft C. Now." Frank fumbled with his console. Shaft C, sir. That's been decommissioned. It only goes up to the service levels on 48. I am aware of what it does. The code." Julian's voice was like chipping ice. Frank, sweating now, punched in a series of commands. A small unmarked steel door behind the main reception desk hissed open, revealing a dusty, dimly lit elevator car. "Sir, I don't think it's been inspected in—" Julian was already inside, the doors closing on Frank's worried face. The ride up was slow, groaning, a journey into the building's forgotten guts. The air was stale, thick with the smell of dust and old machinery. This was the unseen part of his empire, the grimy reality behind the polished facade, and it offended his sense of order. The elevator shuddered to a halt. The doors opened onto a narrow concrete corridor, lit by bare, caged bulbs. Pipes and conduits snaked along the walls like metallic ivy. This was the 48th floor maintenance corridor. He checked the schematic on his phone. The sealed door should be 20 yards down, on the left. He found it. It wasn't sealed. The heavy steel door was slightly ajar, a sliver of the brightening morning sky visible in the gap. He pushed it open and stepped out onto the balcony. The wind hit him first, a cold, sharp gust that whipped at his suit and tore at his hair. It smelled of ozone and altitude. And there she was. She was sitting cross-legged on the cold concrete, her back to him, completely absorbed in her task. Her small shoulders were hunched in concentration, the oversized gray hoodie forming a tent around her. The tablet rested on her lap. On the screen, he could see a complex lattice of code, lines of it scrolling past as her fingers flew across the surface. She wasn't drawing a bird. She was writing the program that drew the bird. He stood there for a full minute, watching her. The sheer improbability of the scene was disorienting. He, Julian Croft, the titan of industry, standing on a derelict balcony behind a small child who had single-handedly caused his company more damage than any corporate rival in a decade. He cleared his throat. It was a small sound, but in the quiet of the morning, amplified by the wind, it sounded like a crack of thunder. The girl didn't startle. She didn't jump or cry out. She simply stopped typing, her fingers hovering over the screen. Slowly, deliberately, she turned her head, looking over her shoulder at him. She had large, dark eyes, the color of rich soil, and they were filled not with fear, but with a calm, unnerving curiosity. She looked at his expensive shoes, his tailored suit, his haggard, unshaven face, and then her gaze met his. "You broke the sea," she said, her voice small but clear, not an accusation, but a simple statement of fact. "I was trying to fix it." Julian was momentarily speechless. He had prepared for tears, for defiance, for a terrified confession. He had not prepared for a design critique. "Fix it?" he finally managed, his voice hoarse. "You call that fixing it? You've cost my company millions of dollars. You've made me a laughingstock." The girl considered this, her head tilted. "I didn't mean to. The code was just sad. It was all broken and sharp. I thought it would look nicer with flowers." She gestured with her chin towards the vast, dark glass facade in front of them. The flowers were difficult. The recursive algorithm for the petal generation kept causing a memory leak in the display's buffer. I had to write a custom garbage collector to handle it. Julian stared at her. He understood maybe half of what she had just said, but he understood the implications perfectly. This wasn't a kid scribbling with a digital crayon. This was a programmer, a prodigy. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice sharper than he intended. "Where are your parents?" "My name is Lily," she said, turning back to her tablet and typing a few commands, shutting down the program. The last blue pixel on the facade died. "And my mom is sleeping. I'm not supposed to wake her." A door he hadn't noticed, a simple, flush-mounted utility door, in the concrete wall of the balcony, opened a few inches. A woman's face appeared in the gap. She looked as pale and fragile as old parchment, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of long illness or chronic exhaustion. But the eyes themselves were sharp, intelligent, and currently wide with panic. She was clutching a thin, worn blanket around her shoulders. "Lily, get inside right now! I told you not to come out here." She saw Julian, and whatever color was left in her face drained away. Her hand flew to her mouth. He recognized her. Not from a society gala or a boardroom, but from a spreadsheet. A single line item from a file dated 7 years ago, titled Redundancy Protocol, Project Streamline. Elena Morales, Senior Coder, R&D Division, terminated. He remembered the day clearly. He had ordered the termination of her entire division, 75 employees, to fund the acquisition of a smaller, more aggressive startup. It was a cold, calculated business decision, a footnote in his relentless ascent. He had never considered the collateral damage. He had never thought about where the names on that spreadsheet went after he deleted them. Now he knew. One of them, at least, had gone to live in a utility closet on the 48th floor of his building, raising a daughter who had become the ghost in his machine. The woman, Elena, stumbled out onto the balcony, pulling Lily behind her protectively. "Please," she whispered, her voice raspy. "Please don't call security. We'll leave. We'll go right now. We don't have anywhere else to go, but we'll leave. Just Please. She's just a child. She didn't understand what she was doing. Julian looked from the terrified woman to the preternaturally calm child. Lily wasn't hiding. She was peering around her mother's legs, her dark eyes fixed on him, her expression one of intense, analytical focus, as if he were a complex problem she was trying to solve. He looked at the tablet in her hands, then at the small, cramped doorway she and her mother had emerged from. He saw a glimpse inside. A small mattress on the floor, a single hot plate, a neat stack of books. They had been living here, in the walls of his empire, not as squatters, but as resourceful survivors, like birds nesting in the mouth of a dormant volcano. The anger that had propelled him here had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, echoing void filled with a feeling he couldn't name. It was more than guilt, deeper than shock. It was the dizzying, nauseating sensation of the world tilting on its axis, of a fundamental truth he had built his life on revealing itself to be a catastrophic lie. He had seen people as assets, as liabilities, as numbers on a spreadsheet. He had never truly seen them as people. And now one of those numbers had a name, a face, and a daughter with genius-level coding skills and a penchant for pixelated botany. "You were a coder," he said to Elena, the words feeling foreign and clumsy in his mouth. "In R&D." Elena flinched, as if he'd struck her. "I was, a long time ago. You taught her this?" He nodded at Lily, at the tablet. Elena's chin lifted, a flicker of pride cutting through her fear. "I taught her the basics. The rest, she taught herself. She reads compiler manuals for fun. She thinks in code." Julian knelt slowly, so as not to spook the child. He was now eye level with Lily. Her expression didn't change. "Lily," he said, his voice softer now. "The code. You said it was sad. What did you mean?" Lily looked at her mother, who gave a slight hesitant nod. She held up the tablet to him. The screen was filled with the source code for the logo's display driver. Julian couldn't read it, not really, but he could see it was dense, convoluted. "It's inefficient," Lily said, pointing with a small, unbitten finger. "Too many redundant processes. It argues with itself, see? This whole block is just a patch for a bug in the primary rendering engine. But the patch creates its own memory conflicts. It's fighting all the time. It makes the processors run hot. It's tired. Tired." She had diagnosed a multi-million-dollar piece of corporate branding as being existentially tired. And the thing was, Julian knew, on a gut level, that she was right. The code was a reflection of the company itself. Bloated, inefficient, patched over with quick fixes, its core purpose lost in a web of conflicting, self-serving protocols. It was a reflection of him. He looked from the code on the tablet to the small, serious face of the girl holding it. She hadn't been hacking his company. She had been trying to heal it. And that realization was more devastating than any act of corporate espionage could ever be. The journey down in the groaning service elevator was a silent, tension-filled descent. Elena stood pressed against the back wall, her arms wrapped around Lily, as if to shield her from the sterile opulence that awaited them in the lobby. Lily, however, was not looking at her mother. She was looking at Julian, her gaze unwavering, her mind clearly working behind those dark, placid eyes. Julian avoided her gaze, focusing instead on the floor indicator, as the numbers slowly counted down. His own mind was a maelstrom. Every instinct he had, honed over a lifetime of corporate warfare, was screaming at him. This was a threat, an unprecedented security breach, a legal and PR nightmare waiting to explode. The logical, ruthless part of his brain, the part that had made him a billionaire, had already mapped out the optimal path. Hand them over to security. Let the lawyers and social services sort it out. Spin the story into one of corporate vigilance, and write a large, anonymous check to a charity to assuage the faint, inconvenient prickle of conscience. It was clean, it was efficient, it was the Julian Croft way. But as he glanced at the reflection of the small family in the polished steel of the elevator doors, the frail, proud mother, and the unnervingly brilliant child, he found the old, familiar ruthlessness failing him. He didn't see a threat. He saw a solution. To what? He wasn't yet sure. But the image of that childish, beautiful bird drawn across the face of his broken company felt less like an act of vandalism and more like a diagnosis. When the doors hissed open to the main lobby, the morning sun was streaming through the vast atrium, illuminating dust motes, dancing in the air like tiny diamonds. Frank, the security guard, scrambled to his feet, his mouth agape at the sight of his employer emerging from the decommissioned elevator with a disheveled woman and a small child in tow. Julian fixed him with a look that brokered no argument. "Frank, my car, now, and not a word of this to anyone. Your job depends on it." He guided them not towards the main entrance, but to a private exit leading to a secure, underground garage. The air, cool and smelling of concrete and exhaust fumes, felt like another world. A sleek black Maybach, silent as a shark, pulled up. His driver, a stoic ex-Special Forces soldier named Marcus, got out and opened the rear door, his face an unreadable mask, though Julian could see the flicker of surprise in his eyes. "Get in," Julian said to Elena. She hesitated, clutching Lily tighter. "Where are you taking us?" "To get breakfast," Julian said, the answer surprising him as much as it did her. "And then we're going to talk." The restaurant was a small, exclusive place he owned a stake in, closed to the public at this hour. They sat in a plush booth, the silence between them thick and heavy. Lily, however, seemed unfazed. She attacked a plate of pancakes with the focused gravity of a scientist dissecting a specimen. Elena just nursed a cup of coffee, her hands trembling slightly. Julian let them be, watching them, trying to piece together the story the spreadsheet had omitted. "How long?" he finally asked, his voice low. Elena didn't pretend to misunderstand. 5 years. After I was let go. My savings ran out. The medical bills..." She trailed off, her gaze dropping to her coffee cup. "What medical bills?" "It's a degenerative neurological condition. It affects my mobility, my energy. It's progressive." Her voice was flat, devoid of self-pity. "I couldn't hold a job, not a demanding one. We lost the apartment. We had nowhere to go. I remembered that corridor from when I worked on a server upgrade project. The door was supposed to be sealed, but the work order was never completed. It was just forgotten, like us. Forgotten." The word hung in the air. Julian felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He had built an empire so he would never be forgotten, yet his success was built on a foundation of forgetting others. "Why didn't you reach out, apply for assistance? There are programs." Elena gave a short, bitter laugh. "Programs? For a single mother with a spotty work history and a pre-existing condition? We were a rounding error, Mr. Croft. A statistical anomaly to be ignored. Living in that closet, it was safe, it was warm. I could still teach Lily. We had everything we needed." She looked at her daughter, who was now meticulously building a tower out of sugar packets. A fierce, protective love radiated from her, a force more powerful than anything in Julian's world of contracts and capital. "She is my everything," Elena whispered. Julian turned his attention to the girl. "Lily, the code on my building, why did you change it?" Lily looked up from her sugar packet skyscraper. "I told you. It was sad. It was making the building sad." "Buildings don't get sad." "They do," she insisted, her expression serious. "They have systems, like a body. If the systems are fighting, the body gets sick. Your building's code is sick. So I gave it something nice to think about. I wrote it a story with pictures." She wrote it a story. He felt that dizzying, world-tilting sensation again. While his team of experts were hunting for a virus, a child was practicing a form of computational therapy on his 50-story skyscraper. The sheer poetic insanity of it was breathtaking. He leaned forward, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "How did you get in? Past all the firewalls? The encryption?" Lily's explanation was a torrent of technical jargon that flowed from her with the unself-conscious ease of a child describing a favorite cartoon. She talked about polling the obsolete Wi-Fi node, finding an unpatched vulnerability in its firmware, using that to gain a low-level foothold in the building's maintenance network, and then patiently, meticulously, escalating her privileges by exploiting a series of minor, overlooked flaws in the legacy code that controlled the lighting and display systems. It had taken her months. It wasn't a brute force attack. It was a conversation. She had talked her way into the heart of his fortress. Julian listened, mesmerized. His entire multi-million-dollar cybersecurity apparatus had been defeated by a 9-year-old girl's curiosity. She hadn't broken in. She'd simply found a door that everyone else had forgotten was unlocked. The implications were staggering. His company was more vulnerable than he could have ever imagined. His board, his shareholders, if they ever found out, they would crucify him. The logical, ruthless voice in his head came back, louder this time. "This is your out. Bury them. The girl is a prodigy, but she's a child. The mother is sick. No one will believe them. You can create any story you want. Protect the company. Protect yourself." It was the smart play, the only play. His phone buzzed. It was his COO, Richard. He ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. The board was meeting. They were panicking. They wanted answers. They wanted a sacrifice. He looked at Elena, at the quiet dignity in her exhausted face. He looked at Lily, who was now explaining to him how she could rewrite the logo's entire rendering engine in a language of her own design that would be 10 times more efficient and use 30% less power. He thought of the spreadsheet. Project Streamline. 75 names, reduced to a single line item in a quarterly report. A cold, calculated decision. He had streamlined their lives right into a utility closet. And in that moment, the choice became terrifyingly clear. The Julian Croft way had led him here, to a hollow victory in a sterile office, to an empire with a sick, sad soul. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to try a different way. He stood up. "Come with me." Elena's eyes widened in alarm. "Where?" "To my office," Julian said. "Lily is going to need a bigger screen." Walking back into the Croft Innovations headquarters, with Elena and Lily in tow, was like setting off a silent alarm. The morning rush was in full swing, the lobby a symphony of clicking heels and quiet, important conversations. As the trio crossed the gleaming marble floor, the symphony faltered. Heads turned. Whispers followed them like a wake. Julian Croft, a man who moved through the world in a self-contained bubble of authority, was escorting a woman who looked like a refugee and a child in a hoodie. The sight was so incongruous, it was like a glitch in their reality. Julian ignored them all, his face a granite mask. He led them to his private elevator, the doors closing on a sea of stunned, curious faces. Back in the penthouse office, the atmosphere was different. The rising sun had burned off the morning gloom, flooding the space with a brilliant, almost painful light. His COO, Richard Sterling, a man whose ambition was exceeded only by his sycophancy, was waiting for him, his face a mask of barely concealed panic. Julian, thank God. The board is on a war footing. They're calling an emergency session for noon. They want a full report on the breach. They're talking about bringing in federal investigators. We need a scapegoat, and we need one now. Richard's eyes fell on Elena and Lily, who stood awkwardly near the door. He gave them a dismissive, questioning look, as if they were a catering delivery that had arrived at the wrong address. Who are they? Julian walked past him to his desk and tapped a button on his console. Rebecca, cancel my morning, and get Dr. Eris Thorne on the line. Tell him I'm calling in a favor. A big one. He turned to Richard, his expression unreadable. Richard, meet Elena Morales and her daughter, Lily. They are the breach. Richard stared, his mouth opening and closing silently for a few seconds before he found his voice. Them, a sick woman and a little girl? Julian, what is this? Is this some kind of joke? Do I look like I'm joking? Julian's voice was dangerously quiet. He gestured for Lily to come forward. She did, without hesitation, and stood before his massive, desk-sized interactive display. Lily, show him what you showed me. Lily looked at the vast, dark screen, then at the tablet she still clutched in her hands. She looked at Julian, a silent question in her eyes. He nodded. It's okay. Show them. With a few deft movements, she tethered her tablet to the office network. The massive screen flickered to life, displaying not a corporate dashboard, but the same elegant, complex code she had shown him earlier. The building's display drivers are obsolete, Lily began, her small voice filling the vast office with an unshakable authority. The code base is a mess of conflicting patches and legacy protocols. It creates recursive loops that degrade processor performance and cause systemic instability. That's why the logo kept crashing. It wasn't an attack. It was a symptom of critical system fatigue. Richard just stared, his face a cartoon of disbelief. She's just a kid. She's the only person in the last week who has been able to tell me what's actually wrong, Julian said, his eyes fixed on Lily. She didn't just find a problem, Richard. She understood it. He turned to Elena. And you taught her. Elena, who had been watching her daughter with a mixture of terror and fierce pride, finally spoke. I taught her to ask why. The rest is all her. The call to Dr. Thorne was short and direct. Thorne was the best neurologist in the country, a man whose groundbreaking research Julian's foundation had been funding for years. There was a clinical trial, a new experimental treatment. Elena Morales was now its newest patient. All expenses covered, non-negotiable. Elena's protest was weak, overwhelmed by the sheer stunning force of Julian's command. Tears streamed down her face as he handed the phone to her to speak with the doctor's assistant. They were tears not of sadness, but of a hope she had long ago abandoned. While Elena was on the phone, Julian turned back to Richard. The COO was still struggling to process the scene. Julian, the board, they will not accept this. A child hacker? A homeless ex-employee? They'll have your head. They'll have my head. That, Julian said, pulling up the files for Project Streamline on his monitor, is where you're wrong. He began to type, his fingers flying across the holographic keyboard. A new project folder appeared. He titled it Project Phoenix. The official story is this, he began, his voice taking on the familiar, commanding tone of a CEO laying out a strategy. The recent glitches with our logo were not a security failure. They were the final stage of a top-secret internal diagnostic program I initiated 6 months ago. A white hat stress test designed to find the hidden vulnerabilities in our own systems. Richard's eyes widened as he began to grasp the audaciousness of the plan. The beautiful images, the ghost, that was the program's signature. A way of flagging the vulnerabilities it discovered in a non-destructive way. And Lily, he looked at the girl, who was now happily redesigning the office's user interface on the big screen, making the icons swirl and dance. Lily wasn't a hacker. She was the first person to successfully interface with the diagnostic. She's the talent we've been searching for. They'll never buy it, Julian. It's too perfect, too convenient. They'll buy it because I will make them buy it, Julian countered, his voice like steel. And because the alternative, admitting that our billion-dollar security was defeated by a 9-year-old with a second-hand tablet living in a closet, is unthinkable. We're not selling them a story, Richard. We're selling them a solution. He pulled up another file, a blueprint for a new R&D division. Project Phoenix won't just be about security. It will be a complete overhaul of our entire software philosophy. We've become bloated, inefficient, tired, just like our code. Lily's approach, it's lean, intuitive, human. She doesn't just write code, she communicates with it. That's our new direction. He looked at Richard, his eyes burning with a newfound, almost manic intensity. Elena Morales will run the new division. Her first act will be to hire back every single qualified engineer we fired 7 years ago in Project Streamline. And her daughter Lily will be her senior consultant. Richard sank into a chair, looking utterly defeated. You're insane. I was insane, Julian corrected him. For the last 10 years, I've been running this company on the principle of ruthless efficiency. I cut out the fat, but I cut out the heart, too. We didn't just lose 75 employees that day, Richard. We lost our soul. This girl, this family, they found it again, hiding in a closet on the 48th floor. I'm not letting it go. Elena finished her call, her face pale, but her eyes shining with a light Julian hadn't seen before. Lily had finished her UI redesign. The screen now displayed a beautiful, swirling galaxy of stars, where the boring corporate icons had been. She had made it better. She had made it beautiful. The intercom buzzed. It was his assistant, Rebecca. Mr. Croft, the board members are all online. They're ready for the emergency session. Julian took a deep breath. He looked at the woman he had fired, the child who had humbled him, and the loyal second-in-command who thought he had lost his mind. This was the most audacious, illogical, and reckless business decision of his entire life. And it was the only one that had ever felt completely, unequivocally right. Patch them through to the main screen, Rebecca, he said, straightening his tie. It's time to show them the future. The faces of the board members materialized on the massive screen, a gallery of grim, accusatory portraits. There was Agatha Monroe, the formidable former senator, whose political connections were as sharp as her wit. General Peterson, a retired four-star whose worldview was forged in the unyielding logic of military strategy, and half a dozen other titans of finance and industry, all of them looking at Julian with the predatory patience of a pack of wolves sensing a wounded alpha. They were here for blood, his blood. "Julian," Agatha began, her voice dripping with icy disappointment, "we have read the preliminary reports. Frankly, they are unacceptable. A catastrophic security failure of this magnitude on our most visible asset is inexcusable. The market has lost confidence. We need a clear, decisive action plan, and we need to know who is being held responsible." Julian stood before them, not at his desk, but in the center of the room. He felt strangely calm, possessed by a clarity he hadn't felt in years. Alina and Lily stood a few feet behind him, out of the camera's direct line of sight, but present. His silent, secret weapons. "Agatha, gentlemen," he began, his voice resonating with a calm authority that seemed to surprise them. "You are correct. There has been a failure, but not the one you think." He gestured to the screen, and Richard, now a reluctant co-conspirator, brought up the title card for Project Phoenix. What you have witnessed over the past week was not an attack from the outside. It was a diagnostic from the inside. A project I personally commissioned to expose the deep, systemic vulnerabilities we have allowed to fester within our own culture and our own code. A murmur of confusion rippled through the virtual boardroom. He had them off balance. For years, we have prioritized growth over stability, expansion over elegance. We've become a company of patches and workarounds. Our code is bloated. Our philosophy is fractured. The logo wasn't attacked. It simply gave out under the weight of its own inefficiency. It was, as you said, Agatha, a catastrophic failure. A failure of my leadership. He let that admission hang in the air, a calculated sacrifice. He saw the surprise in their eyes. Julian Croft did not admit failure. General Peterson grunted, his skepticism palpable. "A diagnostic, Julian? It looked like chaos. It looked like a child's drawings, scrawled across our headquarters." "Precisely," Julian said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "That's the genius of it." He stepped aside, revealing Lily. He didn't introduce her, not yet. He just let them see her, a small, serious child in a gray hoodie. The diagnostic program was designed to be unconventional. It sought out not just technical flaws, but philosophical ones. And to find a truly unconventional solution, you need an unconventional mind. Someone who doesn't see code as a set of rigid instructions, but as a language, a story. He nodded to Lily. She stepped forward, her smallness a stark contrast to the immense power of the men and women on the screen. She connected her tablet, and the facade of the opposite tower, which had been dark, flickered to life. But it wasn't the old, broken logo. It was something new. The silver C and golden I were there, but they were no longer static. They were fluid, alive. They resolved from a swirling nebula of light, the lines clean, elegant, and impossibly efficient. It was the same logo, but it felt different. It felt hopeful. The old code was fighting itself, Lily's small voice explained, echoing slightly in the quiet room. I told it a new story, a story where all the parts work together. It uses a fractal compression algorithm to reduce the processor load by 60%. It's also much prettier. The board was silent, utterly captivated. They were watching a magic trick, and they didn't care how it was done. They were watching a multi-million-dollar problem being solved in real time by a child. "This," Julian said, his voice ringing with a genuine passion he hadn't felt in years, "is the philosophy behind Project Phoenix. We are going back to first principles. We are going to rebuild our core software from the ground up based on the principles of elegance, efficiency, and intuitive design. We're going to stop fighting ourselves." He then introduced Elena Morales. He didn't mention the closet. He framed her as a legendary former coder, a lost genius he had personally recruited out of retirement to lead this new initiative. He told them she would be rebuilding her old team, bringing back the innovative spirit they had foolishly discarded years ago. "We didn't just let our code get old and tired," he said, his gaze sweeping across the faces on the screen, a silent accusation in his eyes. "We let our talent go. We traded vision for profit margins. Today, that changes. This isn't about fixing a logo. It's about fixing our soul." He laid out the vision, the budget, the timeline. It was audacious, expensive, and completely insane. But it was also brilliant. He was not just offering them a scapegoat or a solution. He was offering them a redemption story, a narrative so compelling, so powerful, that it would not only erase the humiliation of the past week, but would redefine the company for the next decade. When he finished, there was a long, profound silence. He had laid his entire career, his entire empire, on the table. Agatha Monroe was the first to speak. She was looking past Julian, her gaze fixed on Lily, who was now showing Elena a new animation she had designed, a soft, pulsating light that made the new logo appear to breathe. "Mr. Croft," Agatha said, her voice devoid of its earlier iciness, replaced now with something that sounded almost like awe. "When can we see a demonstration of the new operating system?" Julian Croft allowed himself a genuine smile. He hadn't just survived. He had won. The war was over. The revolution had just begun. The launch of Phoenix OS was the most anticipated tech event of the decade. The story of the mysterious glitch, respun as a brilliant internal diagnostic, had become the stuff of industry legend. The narrative Julian had crafted in the boardroom had taken root, blossoming into a powerful mythos of corporate reinvention. The world wasn't just waiting for a new product. They were waiting for the third act of a great story. The auditorium was packed. Press, investors, and industry insiders from every corner of the globe had gathered, a palpable buzz of expectation humming in the air. Backstage, the atmosphere was electric. Elena, looking healthier and more vibrant than Julian had ever seen her, was calmly directing her team of engineers, many of them the same faces from the project streamlined spreadsheet, now back, their eyes shining with a sense of purpose. Lily, dressed in a simple dark dress rather than her usual hoodie, was sitting in a corner, her tablet on her lap, running final diagnostics. She seemed utterly unfazed by the monumental scale of the event. To her, it was just another problem to solve. Julian found himself pacing, a nervous energy he hadn't felt since his very first startup pitch thrumming through his veins. Richard clapped him on the shoulder. "You've got this, Julian. They're already in the palm of your hand." But Julian knew this wasn't about salesmanship. Not anymore. He walked over to Lily. "Nervous?" he asked. She looked up from her screen. "No, the code is stable. The primary kernel is performing at 99, 7% efficiency. There is a zero, A 3% chance of a minor graphical rendering error in the tertiary boot sequence, but it's statistically insignificant. Are you nervous? He chuckled, terrified. Why? She asked with genuine curiosity. You just have to go out there and tell the truth. The truth is a little more complicated, Lily. No, it isn't, she said, her gaze returning to her screen. You just have to say what's right. A stage manager called for him. It was time. He walked out onto the massive stage, the heat of 1,000 spotlights hitting him like a physical blow. The roar of the crowd was deafening. He walked to the center of the stage, and instead of standing behind the polished lectern, he stood in front of it, creating an immediate sense of intimacy and vulnerability. The crowd quieted. He began to speak, his voice calm and clear, amplified throughout the cavernous hall. He didn't start with product specs or market projections. He started with a story. For the last 20 years, he began, I have operated under a simple assumption, that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. The most efficient solution is always the best solution. It's a philosophy that made this company a global powerhouse, and it's a philosophy that almost destroyed it. He told them about the old logo, not the technical details, but the feeling of it. He described it as tired, bloated, broken. He confessed that it was a mirror. My company, the empire I had built, had a sick soul, and I was the one who had made it sick. I had traded creativity for productivity, innovation for iteration, and people for profits. I streamlined our company, and in the process, I streamlined our humanity right out of the building. The confession was raw, honest, and utterly disarming. A hush fell over the audience. This was not the arrogant, ruthless Julian Croft they knew. This was someone else. I was lost, he continued, staring at a problem I couldn't solve. And then I found help from a very unlikely source. Not a team of highly paid consultants, but from a mind that saw the world differently. A mind that saw my broken, inefficient code not as a problem to be solved, but as a sad story that needed a happier ending. He paused, his gaze sweeping the audience. I'd like you to meet the person who fixed my company. He turned and gestured to the side of the stage. Lily walked out, clutching her tablet. A wave of confusion and surprise rippled through the auditorium. Who was this child? Julian knelt down beside her, holding the microphone for her. Lily, can you tell everyone what you told me? What was wrong with the logo? Lily looked out at the thousands of faces, a sea of bright lights and dark shapes. She wasn't afraid. It was sad, she said, her small, clear voice carrying to every corner of the room. It had forgotten how to be beautiful. And with that, she touched her tablet. The massive screen behind them, which had been displaying the new, breathing Croft Innovations logo, dissolved. It didn't just change. It transformed into a canvas. And on that canvas, the beautiful, impossible images she had created on the tower facade began to appear. The shimmering blue bird, the field of pixelated flowers swaying in an invisible wind, the school of glowing fish. She showed them the art she had hidden inside the machine. The old systems were built on rigid lines, she explained, as the images flowed one into the other. But the world isn't a straight line, it's a curve, it's a story. Phoenix OS isn't just a new interface, it's a new language, a language that remembers how to be beautiful. She then demonstrated the OS. It was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. The interface was fluid, organic. Users didn't click on icons. They interacted with living, responsive shapes. Files weren't stored in folders. They were woven into a personalized, intuitive tapestry of data. It was more than an operating system. It was a work of art. It was the product of a mind that had never been told there were rules. The demonstration ended with the entire screen resolving into a single, perfect, glowing flower. The audience was silent for a beat, processing the sheer paradigm shift they had just witnessed. And then the applause began. It wasn't the polite, obligatory applause of a corporate event. It was a roar, a standing ovation that shook the very foundations of the building. People were crying. They weren't just clapping for a new product. They were clapping for the story, for the idea that a company, a person, could lose their way and find it again. They were clapping for the small, quiet girl who had reminded a titan of industry that the most efficient solution isn't always the best one, but the most beautiful one is. Months later, the world looked different. Phoenix OS had been released, and it wasn't just a success. It was a phenomenon. It had shattered every sales record, but more than that, it had fundamentally changed the way people interacted with technology. It had injected a dose of humanity, of beauty, back into the cold, sterile world of code. Croft Innovations was more profitable, more admired, and more innovative than it had ever been. But the real change wasn't on the balance sheets. It was in the penthouse office. The stark, minimalist furniture had been replaced with comfortable chairs and couches. The cold, intimidating atmosphere was gone, replaced by the low hum of collaborative energy. It was no longer just Julian's office. It was the headquarters of Project Phoenix. Elena Morales, now the company's celebrated Chief Innovation Officer, was the picture of health and vitality. The experimental treatment had worked wonders. She now led her team with a quiet confidence and a visionary's passion, and was already planning the next generation of their revolutionary software. The company had become a magnet for the brightest, most creative minds in the world, all of them eager to work on a product that valued beauty as much as functionality. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting long, golden shadows across the city, Julian found himself not in his office, but on the 48th floor maintenance balcony. The door to the small utility closet stood open, but the space was empty now, cleaned out, a silent testament to the past. He wasn't alone. Lily stood beside him, her tablet in her hands, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the screen. They were looking across the gap at the other tower, at the Croft Innovations logo. It was glowing softly in the twilight, the new fluid version she had designed. Every few minutes, it would subtly shift, a ripple of light flowing through it, a ghost of one of her flower animations. It was their secret. The core kernel is stable, Lily said, more to herself than to him. But I think I can optimize the predictive data caching algorithm. We could increase energy efficiency by another 5%. Julian smiled. He no longer tried to keep up with her technical explanations. He was learning a different language from her. "Is it beautiful enough?" he asked. She looked up at him, a rare, small smile gracing her lips. "It's getting there." He had become a regular presence in her life, and she in his. He was no longer just her boss's boss. He was her mentor in the strange, illogical world of people and business, and she was his guide in the world of pure, unadulterated creation. He was teaching her how to present her ideas, and she was teaching him how to have ideas worth presenting. He had found, in this strange, makeshift family, something that $9 billion could never buy. He had found a purpose that went beyond profit. A shadow fell over them. Elena had come out onto the balcony, a warm shawl wrapped around her shoulders. She stood beside her daughter, putting an arm around her. "It's getting late, genius," she said softly to Lily. "Time to power down for the night." She looked at Julian, her eyes filled with a quiet gratitude that still humbled him every time he saw it. "Thank you, Julian." "No," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "Thank you, both of you. You didn't just fix the logo. You fixed me." They stood there together for a few moments longer, three people from impossibly different worlds, bound by a shared act of creation. They were no longer a boss, an ex-employee, and a child. They were a team, a family. They watched as the city lights began to twinkle to life, a sprawling galaxy of human connection. And high above it all, the logo on the tower pulsed with a soft, gentle light, no longer a symbol of ruthless power, but a beacon of hope. A quiet reminder that sometimes the most broken things can be made beautiful again, not by being replaced, but by being healed with a little bit of grace, a little bit of genius, and a story that was finally given a happy ending.